This is something a little bit different. We just want to say hello to everyone. I know it's late. We should be able to even catch the replay on YouTube. Blessed, and I've known Amelia for a long time. She's a good friend. How are you doing today, Amelia?
I'm doing great. Thank you. Thank you for
That's
having
good.
me.
Yeah, hey, this is exciting. We're talking about some different things to what people are used to me talking about, so I'm looking forward to that. Um, we're going to be talking about mental health, and it's surprising that in 2022 there's still a stigma attached to mental health. Um, we're just going to have a discussion about a few topics. And for those of you that are watching on Facebook, this will be uploaded to YouTube. So if you want to share this out to your friends, just on my timeline, there's the YouTube version there, and you can share that out. And please subscribe, click the bell for when you so you'll know that when we have new videos. All right, let's get into this. So Amelia, I'll start with you. We'll just have a conversation about this. What are your experiences with mental health? I mean, even going as far back as a child, what are your experiences?
I think for me, it has to do with anxiety. I had anxiety issues when I was younger, but it intensified in college, especially. And basically, it was due to some traumas, and everybody has trauma in their life. But how we respond to trauma determines our mental health, essentially. And I just wasn't responding well to the trauma. I didn't know how to interpret it. I didn't know how to perceive it, and I didn't know how to cope with it. So I would have these anxiety attacks, and I would constantly have this cyclical thinking of what if this happened? And the what ifs were always negative. So it was like a downward spiral of the worst possible case scenarios. And it was very difficult to deal with too. I mean, it was hard to function at work. It was hard to function in school. It was something, the definition of mental illness is something to the state of your mental health that interferes with your ability to function. So when you have difficulty functioning on a daily basis, that constitutes a mental illness typically.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I can remember back to kindergarten, and um, I had friends, but I would make up these fantasies or stories in my head and live them out. Well, not live them out, but believe that it was happening in kindergarten. Um, and what changed throughout that? Okay, so was I think there was a disassociation that was more along the lines of anxiety, and I felt I had to disassociate. And there were certain personality types that I found really hard to understand at what in high school in particular. Um, and certainly there was an ADHD issue there. And now I have to say, thankfully now a lot of that's subsided, but it was incredibly difficult at school, and even in the early days after school, getting sort of removing that stuff. You know, um, I have to say too that in my family there's a lot of mental illness. It wasn't, um, but I mean, to this day, every now and then I feel anxious and I have to tell myself I'm all right. But yeah, those early years were a struggle for sure.
Well, and I think the key thing that you're mentioning, or like kind of quietly mentioning, is the self-awareness. Like it ran in your family. You were aware that you had some issues, and like I was not always self-aware that I had a problem. But I think the first step to getting better is having that awareness of where you're going wrong with your thinking.
Okay.
Because people who aren't self-aware or who don't have some type of self-awareness about where exactly, like, do I have a problem? If so, where exactly is the problem?
Yeah. And yeah, I agree. I can think back to the origins of this happening because of where this came from, and there's no point in going back and sort of, you know, this is not here to name names or anything like that.
Sure.
But I don't remember any of that in preschool, and it's funny that I remember preschool. I don't remember any of that. But something significantly changed when I was a teenager, and um, in the end, it sort of came out as anger, which wasn't good. But a lot of that was due to other things in life that have built up, and since then I've dealt with it. But for a long time, it was tough. It was really, really tough. So, like, what are your I don't know if this is more of a current question or an overall question. What are some of the challenges that you've had with mental health or you have with mental health at this stage? And how do you deal with that?
I think in the beginning, when I recognized I had a problem, it was finding quality care that was a problem. Um, Oftentimes in the mental health field, sometimes there's misdiagnosis, or sometimes it's hard to find the right medication. Now, I didn't know this about the mental health care field, but I had a random or perhaps a divine meeting with a psychiatrist at a coffee shop. I went to a coffee shop in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and I met a psychiatrist there, and he was faculty at the University of Minnesota Twin Cities. And basically, his name was Dr. Myron Stocking, and he told me years ago that the field of psychiatry and just the mental health care field in general was mismanaged. And so that really opened up my eyes, and I could see it in my own path in trying to, obtain mental health care, that you have to be really careful about who you choose as your doctor and therapist, and just be aware of the pitfalls, because they're human too, and they might have their own issues or their own triggers or whatever it might be that from their background. It's really hard for some people to connect well with others, even in the mental health care field, and to fully understand or grasp what one individual might be going through. Now, part of this may be due, David, to the fact that sometimes they don't spend enough time with the patient or ask the right questions. So that was the biggest hurdle, finding the right mental health care provider and also finding somebody who knew how to manage medications well.
Yeah, I agree. And you know, medication, I think it's a juggle because
It is.
everyone's going to respond differently. I don't know if you know this. Um, you know, uh, in the minute in ministry, I talk to a lot of people, and they're on different antidepressants, and I don't have any issue with that. I believe that God has created the medical industry to bless people, and like anything, it can use
Yes.
damage too. But that you can actually go what you call in the USA the drugstore. In Australia, we call it the pharmacy, and you can take a DNA test, and it'll actually show up or tell you what kind of antidepressant that your liver can handle and what your body can handle. Because not everyone, different drugs react in people in
Differently
different
for
ways.
different people. You're right. It's psychopharmacology. I believe they call it psychopharmacology, and they do the genetic testing. I understand what you're talking about. They do the genetic testing for the individual to see how their genetics will respond to the medications. Is that what you're talking about?
Pretty much, yeah. It sounds
Yeah,
exactly like
okay,
that.
okay. That's amazing. Yeah, no, that wasn't around when I got, sick. I don't believe that was around, and I don't know if they're utilizing it to its full capacity yet, here in the United States, but I am aware of it. So that's amazing. I think it's a good tool. I do.
It's a massive step forwards because people, even with, um, I can't say it on Facebook, but with the
Sure.
current issues with a particular virus, um, you know, the, you know, AstraZeneca or Pfizer or it's made out as if they're the names of certain medications to stop a certain cold or virus. Um, but in actual fact, that is just a brand, and so it's like I'm trying to think of if someone takes Zoloft, for example.
Mhm.
Well, uh, what you're talking about, Zoloft is a company. Like you don't know what the first version of Zoloft that came out. It's probably been changed 5, 6, 7 times.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
They modify it. Yep,
yeah, yeah.
that's
I think
true.
that's important for people to know. That's. I'm trying to think, like Prozac, for example. I know that they're onto their fourth version. So when
Wow,
you
I
take
didn't
Prozac
know
out,
that.
yeah, if someone's on Prozac, um, then they're not actually. It's a brand name, you know. So
Yes.
they put in what they feel is the best at the time.
And the thing is, like, I you mentioned something that I really appreciated. You said it's okay for people to take medication and it's not a bad thing. That was another challenge in faith-based circles that I had where some people were like, "You don't need the medicine, just throw it out, just don't take medicine at all," and pray it away or declare scripture. And I do believe God can heal, but I believe God can heal through medication too, as you know. And I think it's extremely dangerous at times for certain individuals to be off their medicine and to just cast that aside or wean themselves off of it. Um, I think Christians in general or people of faith need to be extremely careful with that.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that if someone is divinely healed, the doctor will tell you
Yes,
you need to
yes,
be on your medication or not. And I'm certain that you and I are not doctors.
yes,
Um, so I mean, that just adds more credibility to what something that is supernatural that's happened. But yeah, you definitely don't want to get off your medication without your doctor's approval. So faith, when it comes to faith, community, and challenges, I mean, for me, it's not so much a mental illness now. Every now and then I have struggles with anxiety, but I think half the world has struggles with anxiety. You know, and I know how to deal with that. But it's taken years to sort that out. But I've done, I know how to deal with it. I think this is more personality. I find it very hard to be around a lot of faith communities because maybe I have there's an intense side to me as well as a less intense side, you could put it, if that makes sense. So, you know, some some faith communities that I've been actively involved in, numerous ones. There's always individuals that I find struggle and have struggles, and one of the interesting, I'll tell you, there was a guy at one of the faith communities where I was actively involved in building things there, Anyway, I would struggle to talk to this guy. I didn't know what the problem was, and he'd be able to talk to other people. And years later, he came out and said that he struggled from depression and anxiety. And I have no idea why he had such difficulty talking to me. It could be because maybe it's intimidating. I don't know. But it did that. Just thinking of that, I don't assume anything. Like I try not to assume because I don't know what's going on in people's heads and what's going on behind closed doors.
It's hard sometimes with trauma, and if you've been traumatized by something, sometimes you internalize things. Like even the way people look at you or interact with you, you can internalize things. And you're right. We should be aware that other people are struggling, or they may have their own something that they're struggling with. So yeah, I agree with that unbiased, approach. I think that's very, very useful. Um, do you ever find that, like, as you've like been doing ministry, was there ever a stigma with mental health, or do you think that people were mainly understanding?
Well, the first church that I was in there when I was, preaching there and serving there and the rest of it, yeah, for me, it wasn't a great environment. It was a very toxic environment, and a lot of toxicity came out of it. But I served there for 7.5 years before I'd had enough, before
Sure.
I felt like I was to move on. Um, there was a lot of people that have mental illnesses within that church, um, and to a degree, uh, to a degree, there's depending upon what the mental illness was, there was still stigma. Other
Sure.
mental illnesses, not so much. So that was my experience with that one. The second one that I worked in, and the one that I built, the church that actually planted, um, I would say there would be a massive stigma when it comes to mental health.
I remember, and this was in the secular world when I was in college, when I first started having severe anxiety. Um, there was a girl in the dorms, and she would just give me this look, and it was just so hurtful. And I think she knew I was struggling mental health wise. But I find that it's not only in the things that people say about you, it's the way they sometimes look at you, like, in a patronizing way, So I feel like people should be aware of how they come across. They may not care, though. That's the problem. I feel like sometimes people don't care, and they dehumanize people with mental health problems. It's like dehumanizing. It's like you're not even a human being with emotions. It's just like, "Oh, whatever, they just have issues." And they brush you off. So I've had some experiences where I don't I think reflecting on the past, I can understand why people don't wanna come forward and say that they have mental health problems because of the stigma that still exists, maybe not as bad, but still exists with certain people and the way they view it.
Yeah, yeah. I think people are afraid of what they don't understand.
I think they're afraid too. I think some people also tend to label, like when they use the term crazy, "Oh, that person's crazy," they also tend to group it together with, mental illness somehow being dangerous, and that's not true. Not everybody who has mental health problems is dangerous, and I've heard that too. So, yes, I understand that they're afraid. Some of them are afraid, depending on the mental illness, for sure.
Yeah.
Um, how did you cope with, um, your anxiety, David? I'm just curious.
Well, I think that it's about knowing that there's no threat, and then going back to why, what's trigger. There's always a trigger.
Yeah.
There's always a point of trigger. I think when it comes to anxiety. So going back to finding out what has triggered this, you know, and then thinking about it, and then doing something to get out of my head.
Okay.
Because if I stay in my head, it can get worse. And sometimes you just need a break. You know, you just need to watch something on Netflix or YouTube. That's just me, or read a book. Something to get out of that state. And I find that gets me out of that state. I mean, I'm not saying that I have, I don't think I have serious anxiety, but um, it does pop up still. So, what about yourself? How have you coped with some of the mental health issues that you've?
Part of it is recognizing the lie behind the anxiety, like the spiritual lies and the falsehood at the root of the anxiety. And also by recognizing the lie, also just kind of distracting yourself at the same time, being like, this isn't true. I know that there's, a lot of lies to this anxiety, and then also concurrently trying to distract yourself and move past that thought really helped me.
Okay.
And I also wanted to comment, David, you mentioned something about how you had some anger in the past.
Yeah.
Um, I too had a lot of anger, and mine was primarily about what I went through with certain people. But I find that as a woman, sometimes people look at anger as a negative thing. And I think a friend put it well when he said anger has its place. It's just how I feel how we respond to anger that determines whether it's a good thing. Like we can take anger and we can fuel it into something positive, or we can try to make positive changes, or we can react negatively to it and be destructive. So I think anger, as my friend said, has its place, but it's just how we respond to it. And I think when we respond to it in a positive way, it can be healing to our own mental health.
Yeah. Look, I think it's impossible not to. Something's going to make you angry.
Yeah,
Something's
no,
going
but some people avoid that emotion, and I think that's unhealthy to avoid anger completely.
to. I see a lot of that. So I
Yeah.
see a lot of people that, you know, what it comes back to is some. If you want to go to the faith-based community, right? They
Mhm.
think they can pray away the issues. You can't pray
Yes,
away the issues. The
yeah,
issues have to be processed. You
they
know,
do.
there's
They
something
do.
that I call conscious hurting. Okay, and it's where if there's an emotion that comes up, I don't want to get rid of it. I want to sit with it, and I want to find out where is this emotion coming from. You know, because any emotion can spurt in any direction from a trigger. Again, something that triggers a person. You know, and if you can work out what the trigger is, then
100%.
you go, now I put my finger on it. Now I know what I'm dealing with.
100%. And if you can surrender once you identify that trigger, and for me, it was the spiritual lies, like identifying the spiritual lie, like learning to surrender it to God is key. Because I mean, we can only do so much, but I believe when we surrender that to God through prayer or a conscious effort, He'll give us creative solutions to deal with it and give us like a peace of mind. That's worked for me at least. Just
Yeah,
practicing. And what I mean by surrendering is relinquishing control issues. Like I try to control things too much in my life, but relinquishing that control issue to God and just giving Him the power and the glory really helped me get past certain issues.
Look, I think anyone that's had a past where um, they've had a very strong, usually it's a mother, they've had a really
Yes.
strong mother that's wanted them to do this or that. Okay, so I'm not, I don't want to use myself as an example of this.
Well, no, I can relate. I can relate to what you're saying.
So my mom's not like that. I'm not saying that.
Sure,
Someone
but
else.
my mom is a lot, yeah.
We just, so the natural instinct is, if you've been controlled for a long period of time and all of a sudden you've got all this freedom, the natural instinct at first is to rebel. It just is. Yeah, so that's a process. Well, that's what I think. What do you think about that?
I think when you're controlled so much, it breaks your spirit. Like for me, coming from the background that I did and the relationship that I had with my mother, I didn't have the freedom to make my own decisions, career choice wise, financially wise, even at times, friendship wise. Like it was almost every aspect of my life was being controlled or like criticized or emotionally manipulated. And I think it just breaks your spirit when you feel like you're controlled so much. So, yes, I do believe when you finally have the freedom, you try to correct things. You try to balance out the equilibrium and you can respond in really unhealthy ways. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that. All right. So I talked a little bit about coping. How do you cope with some of the mental health stuff that you face?
I think as far as coping goes, I mean, I mentioned a little bit of it with identifying the spiritual lies, um, surrendering to God, any control issues that you might have. Like you said, identifying the root cause or the triggers. Um, Another technique that I use is kind of narrative therapy. A psychologist taught me it, and I've used it even before she mentioned it, but just kind of like when you have a thought, kind of like bringing it to closure. So let's say you have a scenario playing out in your mind, bringing that scenario to closure on a positive note and having faith that things can end positively. Does that kind
Yeah,
of make sense? Like you write your
yeah,
story with the thought and say, you know what? If this does happen, this is how it's going to end, or this is how I'm going to try to cope with it. And also, the other thing, David, is me with my controlled background, not trying to control other people, only controlling my own responses and my own behaviors, but not trying to control other people because it's impossible. We have to give people the freedom to even behave badly, even though it may hurt us, but they have freedom to make their own choices too.
yeah. Well, you brought up, and that's an interesting point. Um, and there are some people with mental illness, depending upon what it is, that are really vulnerable people. They're the most
Yes.
vulnerable people in society. So one of the things that I think is really unhelpful at the moment is the whole QAnon or whatever it is, all the conspiracy theories,
It's
and
very negative.
it is very negative, and it takes advantage of people that really do have mental illness. It's not good.
100%. It's demonic. I mean, I hate using that term, but it's fear driven.
Yeah,
It's paranoid. You're talking about conspiracy theories, right?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's a way of grabbing people's fears and transforming it and magnifying it into some type of paranoia. It's not even real, but they believe it.
yeah. They do, and the goalposts keep changing, and they still believe, and it's hard to believe they believe, but it is what it is. All right,
Yes.
all right. So That's definitely. So I think that people that do are sensitive to certain issues dig deep and probably have a really maybe a stronger understanding than others that don't have those struggles. What have you learned from mental health as far as your experiences go?
Well, in terms of what I've learned, I think I've learned empathy. Like, I've always had it, but it's deepened and it's sharpened. Like, my empathy has grown more because I understand people and their struggles more. Um, I also feel like this is gonna sound interesting, but with the negative thinking, my analytical abilities have gone up in terms of identifying problem areas in my life. So just like analytical abilities, um, empathy, I would say, communication. So, like when you're having problems, learning to communicate them effectively and just learning to manage conflict internally and externally. And I believe God, it has drawn me closer to God and has enabled me to see God more clearly in terms of his character and how he's helped me. So
Okay.
it's definitely developed a relationship with God, and I believe God can bring good out of anything. I really
Yeah.
do, and I believe that's biblical. Whatever he allows, he brings good out of even what seems like the worst of situations. So a lot of good has come out of it.
Mm, okay. I
That's what
look.
I've learned.
This is a bit of a curveball. So, let's say, so for someone that doesn't believe that is not a believer,
Uh-huh.
that struggles really hard with mental health.
Yes.
I don't know how I'd answer this question, so if you can't answer,
That's
that's all right.
okay.
What would be something that they could hold on to realistically?
If they don't have faith in God, there's still good that will come out of it. You may not recognize the source of it. You may identify it as yourself or something that you've done yourself, like self-empowerment. A lot of people talk about self-empowerment. I believe the source comes from God, but regardless of of what you believe, good will come out of it. So
Absolutely.
hold on to what will come out of it because it'll be good. It'll be positive, it'll be life-changing, it'll bring you peace of mind.
Yes. Well, Amelia, this is our first video. We're gonna try and we'll do this weekly as we can. I'm
Yes.
sure we'll be able to do that. Now, I think we're going to set up an email. So if you guys have questions, we can answer those questions for you. We'll certainly
Yeah.
get some very inspirational people, other guests on in the future. Now, this will be uploaded to YouTube. It's already being streamed through YouTube. You can actually get the link above this. But I'll put the link for those of you who are watching on YouTube. For those of you who are watching on Facebook, if you look above this right now, you'll be able to click on it and go to our channel. And it would really help us if you subscribe, hit the bell. There's some things that we're going to add in. This is just the first one we've done, and um, we'll get there with adding that stuff in. But I think these videos are going to be really helpful for people, and it's something that doesn't get talked about a lot. It sort of gets swept under the rug, even with all the governmental services. I don't know about the USA, but in Australia, there's a lot of governmental services, but for they're usually for young people. But anyways, is there anything you wanted to say, Amelia, before we wrap it, the first episode up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, there's always hope if you are struggling with mental health issues. Um, there's always hope that things will get better, and they will. That's all I wanted to say. So thank you for watching,
Yeah.
and I
Thank
look
you.
forward to next week, so that'll be great.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Amelia, it's been a pleasure.
Thank
We'll
you.
see you guys next week. If you want to ask, if you want to, while we're setting up an email, in the meantime, if you have a question to ask, just inbox us on Facebook, or if you're on YouTube and you're watching this currently, um, we'll have links. We'll set the email up in the next couple of days, and link it all together so that you can send in your questions and uh, anything that you'd like us to talk about. Excellent. All right, guys. Well, we'll see you next week, and have a good week.
Have a good week.